Chapter 8. General Marmaduke, after the affair of the Little Red, formed a junction with General Walker, and they moved their united commands for Brownsville. General Davidson, with his cavalry division and artillery, our 4 companies of infantry being the support to the artillery, also moved for Brownsville. Striking the open prairie of Prairie County, Arkansas, the entire command was thrown out in battle line, the 4 companies of the 32nd keeping pace as support to the artillery. Across the prairie, and at times in full sight, could be seen the enemy's infantry, cavalry, and artillery retreating before us. The whole presented a grand army scene. Just before reaching Brownsville, the enemy commenced a rather precipitate retreat, and moved somewhat rapidly for the skirt of pine timber to the left and beyond the village. General Davidson then checked his advancing lines and ordered a halt. He suspected a decoy. The timber was planted with masked batteries and men in ambush. Davidson preferred a flank movement to being caught in such a trap. It was probable on this day that the difficulty between General Walker and General Marmaduke commenced. That resulted in a duel and the death of Walker on the morning of September 6, 1863, 7 miles below T. Little Rock. No doubt the envy and jealousy between Walker and Marmaduke gave us an easier victory at Little Rock. On the 23rd, the detachment again returned to Devall's Bluffs as guard to the supply train. On the 25th of August, the command again marched from Devall's Bluffs to Brownsville. It was another hot day, and it was 11 o'clock at night when the detachment marched into a little courthouse yard. As we marched in the gate, General Davidson, who was standing nearby, said, "Boys, lie down quickly and get some rest, for I will need you at an early hour." And then to another officer at his side said, "These brave boys have marched 500 miles and kept up with the cavalry, and I might add that General McPherson's medical director afterwards remarked at Vicksburg, when one of our men applied for a sick furlough, the marching of 4 companies of infantry through on that campaign to keep up with the cavalry was a burning shame, and one of the grandest outrages of the war. It was no wonder that the men were all broken down. General Davidson was a fine cavalry officer, but what have we to thank him for? Almost the entire way from Devall's Bluffs to Brownsville was a level prairie, destitute of water. Many of the men, overcome by heat, fell by the wayside. The ambulances could not haul all the sick. They would load up all that could possibly be crowded in, then drive ahead of the column as far as was thought safe, unload them by the roadside in the broiling sun, then return for another load. Thus, the sick men were alternatively hauled in ambulances and left by the roadside in the scorching heat of the August sun, where not a drop of water could be had. At 2 a.m. of the 26th, we were called out by reveille, giving very little rest to the tired soldier. A march of 9 miles, part of the time on double quick, brought us to the enemy's outposts and other rifle pits which were stormed and taken on the double quick. The enemy then retreated to another rise or ridge, where they attempted to plant their artillery, but our artillery opening on them, the shells sweeping through their lines, they again retreated. Our command was then ordered forward in pursuit down a long hill through the timber and thick matted brush, almost impossible to get through, to the edge of the bayou. Bayou Mateer is a sluggish, miry stream with steep banks covered with a heavy growth of underbrush, and at all points difficult to cross. The bridge across the stream was prepared for destruction by a thorough coating of tar and turpentine. The artillery was so posted as to rake the road across it and sweep the bridge, and their infantry and dismounted cavalry deployed in strong skirmish lines on the opposite banks. The unevenness of the ground and the heavy timber and matted growth of the underbrush making for them a complete ambuscade. When the last of their rear guard had crossed up the bridge, the torch was applied, and dense clouds of smoke rolled up. The enemy then opened with their artillery, and 1,000 muskets rang out from their ambuscade, thus disclosing to us their line and position, for so completely sheltered were they that we could only discover their whereabouts by the flash of their guns. General Davidson brought his artillery quickly into play, and for a time the ringing of the musketry along the entire lines from both sides was incessant. The roaring of the artillery, as they sent shot and shell on their errands of destruction, lent its voice to swell the diapason of harmonious discord. After a time the musketry in great measure ceased, and the engagement took more the form of an artillery duel. General Davidson rode a splendid chestnut horse, and his movements during the day was a matter of comment. Watching as he did with his field glass every movement of the enemy, now directing the fire of our artillery, watching the execution of the shot and shell, then off to the right flank and next to the left, in short, watching and directing every movement of his entire line. Our detachment lost one man, Robert Atkinson of Company D, shot through the bowels, and John Kirby shot through the thigh. B. Williams was shot in the breast just above the heart. The ball striking a rib passed clear around the body, coming out through his clothes on the opposite side. The 1st Iowa Cavalry had 21 men killed in attempting to pass the bridge, being fired upon by the enemy in their ambush. In the evening, the detachment was ordered to fall back onto the hill to support the artillery in an artillery duel with the enemy, and a portion of it was sent out as skirmishers and sharpshooters. Here the enemy got our range so completely that their shot and shell would scale the brow of the hill, making the dust and dirt fly. But by lying down a little back of the brow, they passed over us. Darkness found us here, and all the other troops and artillery had withdrawn from the field, with the enemy closing around us. But we returned that night to the rear of Brownsville. Horace Greeley and all other authority to the contrary notwithstanding. It was 1 o'clock that night when we were halted in an old cornfield near Brownsville. At the word halt, men laid down between corn rows, no attempt being made at encampment or an alignment, and were soon asleep. But dense, dark clouds overhung the skies, and soon the rain came down in torrents, thoroughly soaking the ground and men alike. When daylight dawned, the old field was a vast slough of red mud, and the boys trenched and muddy, without any rations. They soon discovered a sweet potato patch and had a sweet potato breakfast, then moved out of the old mud field to a decent camping place in the timber. After a few days, moved camp to the north side of town and camped at the edge of a little grove of oaks, where an old double log house and back of the camp was a pond of stagnant water where men could go to wash their clothes. In a few days, nearly every man was on the sick list. In their report of the Battle of Bayou Metraire, as published first in the Chicago papers, not an officer or troop engaged in the fight was mentioned. It was a great victory, gained by General Steele and his troops. Steele was at Duval's Bluffs, 39 miles away. On the last night of August, owing to the intense heat, the supply train was ordered to go to Duval's Bluffs in the night, and our detachment to go as a train guard. Only 40 men could be raised in the 4 companies, and 15 of them were too weak to march. But the order was, they must go. They can be piled on the wagon and can shoot in case of an attack. The train returned again in the night. By the 5th of September, there was scarcely a well man in that camp, not a man subject to detail. Every nook and corner of that old house, on the porch, in the gangway, between the old houses, and the old lofts, wherever a sick man could be laid, was taken up. Sick and dying were under the trees, wherever shelter could be made for them. The camp had formerly been used by cavalry and could not be properly policed. It was crawling with maggots, and there were not enough well men enough to take care of the sick and bury the dead. There was not men enough subject to detail to dig a grave. The doctor did all that any doctor could do under the circumstances, but he was crippled in his work for want of medicine. Our 4 companies of infantry were in advance of the main infantry army, in advance of proper medical and sanitary supplies, and even the ordinary food of the soldier. Some of our hardtack was full of wee things. I have seen the men break up their hardtack into small bits and blow the little things alive. Eat that or nothing. In fact, those days little was required or wanted to eat by the boys. On the 8th of September, camp was moved to the other side of town. All that could be moved and moved to a little grove south of the courthouse. An improvement in camps, but disease was doing its work, and the little graveyard in the brush back of the courthouse taking its full share.